of the Caribbean. I welcome this opportunity to salute the heroes and heroines of the Buckley's riots. I'm doing this against the background of the fact that this year the persons responsible for History and Heritage Week have chosen as their theme celebrating the contribution of our everyday heroes and heroines to the history and heritage of St. Kitts Nevis. Undoubtedly, if you are going to prepare any list of the heroes and heroines of St. Kitts, those persons who made the sacrifice, those persons who shed their blood in order to win the splendid victory which they won in 1935, those persons must be included among our heroes and heroines. Why do I call them heroes and heroines? I need to make this point because certainly young people in St. Kitts believe that heroes are limited to national heroes, that is to say, politicians who are no longer with us, and it is they who are national heroes. We thank God for what the heroes, the national heroes, have done, and may their souls rest in peace. But we would be shortchanging ourselves if we limit our vision to politicians. Hence our theme this year, the everyday heroes and heroines, the men and women who walk the face of this island and who by their hard work, by their sacrifice, by their courage, by their dedication, by their commitment, they are the ones who are showing us how to live. They're the ones who are helping us to form this nation. And I hope and pray that the message will not be lost on us. I'm very troubled by the fact that we pay such scant regard to our history. It is very sad. It is very, very tragic. And it is we who are shortchanging ourselves, because I want to submit to you that if only we knew more of our history, we would have a stronger sense of identity as to who we are, as to where we came from, and indeed where we are going.
Sure.
Because if we do not know where we came from, we cannot even know where we are, much more where we are going.
Sure.
And so we are shortchanging ourselves. And I want to make the strongest plea possible for our leadership, not just the political leadership, but all our leaders, to recognize how critically important it is for us to know our history and for us to derive the strength and the inspiration and the hope from knowing our history, because I want to suggest to you that we are descended from a proud race of heroes and heroines. Because you see, if you think of what slavery was, if you think of what slavery meant to our forefathers and mothers, then they had to be of the utmost courage and fortitude. They were not only physically strong and courageous, because by definition, it was only the strong and courageous ones who survived the Middle Passage and then survived all that they had to endure here on the island of St. Kitts. They were strong, they were courageous. And I want to remind you that they never, 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 never gave in to slavery. They always sought an opportunity to affirm and assert their freedom, which they had been living under in Africa. This represented the crop of the stock of Africa. Young men and young women who were snatched in the prime of their lives, at a time when they were fit to make the best contribution they could to their country and their civilization. They were seized and locked up in dungeons and then shipped across the seas in order to work as enslaved people here in the Caribbean. I'm saying to you that these were strong and courageous and proud individuals, because if they were not, they too would have succumbed to all of the pressures to which they were subjected.
On that journey, boy.
That is why the Indians never survived. The Amerindians did not survive. They fell victim partly to European diseases and partly to the pressure, the conditions under which they had to labor when the Europeans came to the Caribbean. The Amerindians did not survive. And to a large extent, the Europeans did not do much better. And it is thanks to the strength and the resilience of our African forefathers and mothers that the English economy, the English industrial revolution, it was on their backs, on their sweat and toil and sacrifice, that industrial revolution was built. So let us not buy into the nonsense that African people were in some way inferior. And I'm saying that we need to know our history, and we need to interpret our history aright, so that we do not buy into the European propaganda which says, well, they were an inferior race and that is why they were enslaved. And I'm suggesting to you, my brothers and sisters, those who stay away, those who do not want to be part and parcel of this celebration, they are in fact buying into that propaganda, instead of coming out and affirming that yes, their freedom was largely won in 1935, they stay away. They want to have no part of it. I want to, in a few brief moments, to put into context what happened in 1935. Because, as I said before, it was not just a St. Kitts incident. It is something which was the springboard for similar activities, riots and rebellions up and down the Caribbean. It started here in St. Kitts. And so anyone who wants to say to you that in some way we, the people of St. Kitts, are descended from inferior stock, tell them no. Learn your history. And I want you to understand that in 1935, almost on this very site that we are standing this afternoon, when the men and women said to Mr. Dobridge, no thank you, we have had enough, and they started a movement which transformed the whole of this society and indeed the Caribbean. Why do I say that? Prior to 1935, it was against the law to form a trade union. And it therefore meant that the workers had no kind of representation. They came to Mr. Dobridge and they asked, well, what are we working for this time, boss, this year? And he said something like this, same as usual. Which meant that he could increase the wage if he chose to, or he could reduce it quite arbitrarily. They had no say whatever in the matter. And they felt that, they'd had enough. Bear in mind that it was 100 years since emancipation.
Yep.
And when they reflected upon their lot, they must have said, well, after 100 years, and every year people used to meet and have parades in order to, as they call it, celebrate emancipation. And the more thoughtful people among the working class said, well, what do we have to celebrate? We are still slaves to the system. We are still slaves to the system. The law might have said you are no longer slave, but the economic system kept you enslaved because you had no say whatever in determining the wage for which you will work or not work. So that was terribly, terribly, terribly important. Bear in mind that 40 years before, in 1896, there had occurred what became known as the Portuguese riots, for the same kind of reasons. But in that case it was a revolt, a rebellion against the wage structure. But 1935 was more all-embracing, because it was talking now not just about working conditions and wages, because they were talking about the living conditions.
Sure.
St. Kitts was in a situation where people were just voting with their feet. They were going away to Cuba, to Santo Domingo, to America, to Panama, wherever they could go, they were going, to the extent that between 1896 and 1930, the population of St. Kitts fell by 43%. And so when you wonder today, well, where have all the Kittitians gone? They were going in their numbers away from St. Kitts. And St. Kitts, as a result, was like a magnet drawing people from the other islands. And so today you're finding that Kittitians are not as nationalistic as they should be, because they lost such a vast proportion of their native population. People who should have been here building and trying to make it, they went away. The point I'm making then is that in 1935, it was not just a rebellion of people who wanted better wages. They were also saying, in the wake of the Workers' League, of which Mr. Frank spoke, they were also saying, well, after all, we should have the right to vote. Bear in mind that in 1935, there were no elections being held in St. Kitts, and that had been going on for nearly 60 years. In Antigua it was not so, in Dominica it was not so, but for some reason they wanted to make sure that St. Kitts never had anybody to vote, even though it was by way of property and other consideration. But they had no right. All the people were being appointed to different offices by the governor or administrator at the time. And so they were saying, no, this is offensive to our human dignity. They were rebelling against all of these things. And so we have to understand that 1935 was a transforming moment, not only in the history of St. Kitts, but in the history of the entire Caribbean. Because you see, within months, within weeks, if you will, similar activities, riots and uprisings were taking place from Jamaica, Barbados, all the way down to Trinidad. But bear in mind that the example was set here in St. Kitts. And so today we are happy to celebrate our heroes and heroines. Why? Because they have shown us the way. They were not violent people. And even today you get the impression that some people want to have nothing to do with the Buckley celebration, because they say, well, these were people who were violent and they were but that they in fact had the moral high ground. They had the moral high ground because they had been begging for years and years and years. They were begging for the right to be heard, to express themselves, to vote for whom they wanted to vote, so that their children could have a better life. And all, they were trying, but nothing happened. And it reached the point where they felt, well, listen, we cannot take this anymore. It is only human that we should react and respond to the challenge which is confronting us. And that indeed is the nature of a hero or a heroine. They put themselves at risk. They put themselves at risk for the benefit of others. Yeah. It really didn't matter to them that some of them might actually lose their lives. Some of them might end up in jail. Some of them might be maimed for life. It didn't matter to them. And we have this picture being painted in the official reports, that after 3 men had been shot and killed by the Defense Reserve on the Monday afternoon, you had women leading, being in the vanguard and leading the counterattack, saying to the police, shoot me no, shoot me no. I mean, they had reached such a point of defiance. Nothing could stop them. And they were so committed to ensuring that better must come for them and for their children. I asked my brother here what theme he had chosen for this year. And he said to me something like, what?
Your blood was not shed in vain.
Your blood was not shed in vain. I have to be very careful here, because I can't be disagreeing with you at all in any way if you make a statement of that nature. All right? But it is a question to ask. It is a question to ask. The heroes and heroines whom we celebrate, the courage which they showed, the courage which they demonstrated, is it lost on us? The sense of unity that they demonstrated, is it lost on us? I want you to answer that question individually. And in closing, I want to say that I salute the organizers of this function.
Yeah.
And I say to you, be not discouraged, because the greatest movements in the world started with a few individuals who had vision, who had courage, who showed commitment, and who were prepared to move forever forward. And
Grandfather, may I name him Batrosh?
Name him what?
Batrosh.
Is that a name for a dog?
Oh, yeah. That's what Peter
That's a
Paul
really good
Rubens named
system.
his dog. Here.
discouraged by the fewness of numbers, by the lack of support, because the most successful movements in the world and throughout history, they became successful because that little nucleus were determined never to give in, but to keep moving forward until they attained success. Thank you, and I trust and pray that the movement